Well, that was wonderful. That was really inspiring in terms of both the challenges and some of the solutions and applications. What I'd like to do now is open it up to questions from the floor, either about what the space agencies are doing or about the specific projects that we heard from the winners. So please. And while you're thinking about your questions, I have one to start, and then I'll get one from the field. So what's the most immediate application terrestrially to the work that everybody is, the challenges that people are facing? I'm asking this really to the agencies, because we hear what the two companies are doing terrestrially, but as you survey all the work being done in the space agencies, what do you think the most immediate application is on Earth?
So, is this on?
It should be.
I don't usually need a microphone. I think the challenge we have is that relative to the overall budgets for the space agency, for NASA, only a small percentage of that goes into what we would call plant growth, food production. Food production is really, we try to fit that in where we can within the constraints of the research organization that funds us. So our focus has been primarily on technology, and that deals with not only the lighting aspects, how do we improve the lighting, but the sensors to develop the AI, and this is where we also partner with the USDA, the AI intelligence and machine learning to be able to see how the stresses that these plants are exposed to can be mitigated and detected early with different sensors. And then we look at how do we manage the problem of microgravity and air and water to the root zone. That's the big thing. So when I look to bring that back to a terrestrial application, there's a lot of I would say it's the lighting aspect and it's the efficiency aspect and the instrumentation. Now, I recognize that some of the technologies related to the instrumentations and the sensors, if I'm looking to deploy that in a commercial environment, may be cost prohibitive. So we're trying to figure out how do we work with different agencies to minimize those costs and see where it makes sense to deploy. So unfortunately, since our organization is really focused more on the research, there's less of an ability to do direct application to the commercial field right now. I think we're in this transitional period, this cusp of moving from plants for research to plants for food production. I think that's where we're going to see more opportunities open up.
I think Ralph summarized it already very well. So the goal is really to be more effective in minimizing the resources that are being used. But I really have to say I'm not the expert here on this panel because I'm so much involved in space operations. But there are, I think, great possibilities of translating what we learn in space to the ground.
I meant to say a few words which I sort of forgot on my speech, but it's related to this, which is that, what is the coupling also? I mean, is the space thing for solar foods, is it a dangling sort of appendix? Why do we do this? So there's actually a connection on our Earth-based factories on these space things. So the requirements for stability, maintainability, reliability, operability, whatnot, are orders of magnitude higher for a spacefaring bioreactor, bioprocess. If you have visited any bioprocess, usually you see a lot of people in white jackets, busily tweaking valves and, measuring things, and it's quite labor intensive actually. So the coupling here from space back to Earth is that we believe that once we figure out all these challenges for the spacefaring bioreactor, increasing its level of automation and reliability, we can then apply same methodology on our ground-based factories, which means that they can be, instead of having a, crew of 500 bioprocess engineers, maybe we get by with 10. And that directly then comes down to the, cost of the product at the end. Then there's this other topic that is also space-related, which I didn't really have slides on, but we're also looking at scaling down and distributed protein production. So we've estimated that we could actually put this bioprocess into a 40-foot container with a capacity of one container feeding a community of 300 people. In the CSA talk, we heard about isolated communities. I'm actually talking with the Chilean government that they have research bases on Antarctica, which are pretty difficult from a logistics standpoint. So could we? And then there's the ultimate distributed manufacturing. It's like if you saw our space bioreactor 3D CAD thing. Is there a consumer market for this? I mean, could we have a protein bioprocess in every house that you are actually producing your protein inside your home? Who knows?
Great, thanks. I'll ask both you and Barbara this question, which is, what's the one thing that keeps you up at night about the project you're working on?
Which one of them?
Well,
Just one.
I actually sleep quite well. I meditate every morning and every night. It's not a it's a it's a long distance running. So if you run too fast too soon and you don't manage your sleeping or your breathing, then you're gonna die with exhaustion. Yeah. So I learned. I was an entrepreneur before, and I financed a lot of entrepreneurs before. So yeah. Well, you rationalize and critical pass, and yeah. You sleep well?
No, it's the age. But anyway, for us, I guess it's one thing which is a new environment is obviously microgravity, and there have been bioreactors that have been flown, but they are sort of a fraction of this cup. So we have some designs already for this. So I think we're gonna make it and we're gonna solve it. But obviously we have also some fundamental questions which we also hope to answer sooner rather than later, which is that this bacterium that we've chosen as our production organism, how does it fare in microgravity? And just maybe on Leo, and then there's the question of how will it survive, beyond the Allen belt. But I don't have to actually lose my sleep on that because we're going to do those experiments. So we'll get the answer.
So question here. And by the way, Matt's on the phone, so if there are any questions for him as well, he's joining us too.
Okay, good afternoon. This is Biplav Nandi from ILSI, India. I have just one observation with regard to our food out of thin air. Very exciting, and I have learned a lot on this presentation. So, Dr. Artu, I have 2 points to make. One is you have chosen or you have already started doing something in Singapore. Do you have plans to extend it to other countries for that matter, or it is just a piloting you are doing there and based on that you will further it to other countries? This is number one. Okay. And second is, this is food out of thin air. Now, does pollution has got any impact on this particular mechanism of your doing things or converting hydrogen and carbon dioxide into food protein, the impact of pollution for that matter? So these 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent question. So yeah, so the first question about where are we going to be, what's the market? I mean, the market is obviously global, but what's driving it? There are 2 things. One is obviously, well, there are more than 2, but the main things are, one is the fact that we are in many places considered as a novel food, which does require in many places some sort of regulatory approval. I'm not actually quite sure how is that done in India. I'm not sure. I'm not privy to your legislation, so I don't understand it. But that's one thing. The second thing is that the cost of Solein is really driven by the cost of renewable or greenhouse gas emission-free energy. I was just actually in Chile last week. Interesting country in the sense that they have so much green energy, they have no idea what they're going to do with it. Especially in the north of the country, they have wind and solar, and I think they make something like 700 times more energy there than they can currently use. So places like that are super interesting for us. Places where you have lots of green electricity, whether it's hydro or wind or solar, doesn't really matter. The other thing which is also interesting is that there are many places in the world where people are talking about various sort of hydrogen projects. So, because one of the problems with renewables is that, when it's windy, you get wind power, but if it's not, you don't get anything. And Finland, you don't get much solar this time of the year. And there's the intermediate storage problem. So one approach to this is that you couple into the hydrogen economy. So there will be big hydrogen players. I'm sure India has these as well. So you make a lot of hydrogen and you store it when your propellers are going like crazy, and then you use it when it's not windy, for instance. As respect to the pollution, yes, indeed. I mean, we must have it pure, so it has to be clean. So, but that's another much more than an engineering thing. I mean, you need to have proper filtering for your feedstocks so that you don't get any of the nasty things in the air into the prior process. Those have to be pure, yeah.
There's a question in the back.
Thank you. Juan Andrade, University of Florida. Just two questions. Thank you. The last presentation, very encouraging. I was wondering about the fiber. What is the nature of the fiber? What is in there for your product?
Fiber,
Yes.
okay. Well, this is where I get caught with a PhD in physics, so I really don't know, but I can get you connected to the people who will be able to answer.
I think because we're talking about the food for the crew, but the other half of the crew is the microbiota you have there. So that fiber will feed them, right, too. So figure out how that interact will be very cool. The other question I had, what was the quality of the protein? You say 65%, I guess 70%, we call it protein concentrate by Codex, but what will be the quality of that? It's complete, it has all the amino acids, but it's digestible protein.
Yeah.
And if any issues with, for example, those little peptides that might trigger other reactions in the body, like allergens. Yeah.
I can sort of take a stab at the last question. So we actually do things, I don't want to get into details, but we do things which are mostly mechanical at the end of the process, which improves the bioavailability. So basically we have done analytics on the bioavailability score. So that score is pretty good. I mean, it's good. If you were to just take the cell mass, and one thing which I did, by the way, I don't think I mentioned, but we do pasteurize it. So of course the bacteria that comes out of the bioreactor is still alive, but then we pasteurize it so it's killed, and then we do these mechanical things to it so that the bioavailability is improved. And with respect to the sort of secondary reactions, my understanding is that some of these things have been subject to some of the questions and part of the dossier that we've submitted for the EFSA. And there are no, there are no issues on that side that we have at least come across. I mean, obviously we've done, the EFSA thing, it's pretty strict. You have to tick a lot of boxes to prove its safety.
Last question, where can I have a sample?
Yeah, well, come and visit us. That's the easiest way. Yeah.
Hello, this question is probably mostly towards Ralph. I was wondering if you could explain why put the Deep Space Food Challenge under Kennedy Space Center instead of JSC, which is where the Space Food Laboratory is, and then to follow up, how do finalists and winners bridge that gap between winning or being a finalist in the Deep Space Food Challenge, but it doesn't seem like part of the award is any commitment on NASA's part to actually get them into space, get them into ISS?
Right. Two good questions. So the first question is straightforward and easy. Again, why I came here to talk about crops is because originally what was the genesis for the Deep Space Food Challenge was talking about how do we potentially use the Centennial Challenge program as a way to solve some of the specific crop production issues that we have. And when we stepped back a little bit and looked at it, we said, you know what, this should really be extrapolated and expanded to food in general. So when it comes to plant growth and plant and food production based on plants, the Kennedy Space Center is the lead NASA center for that. So that's why it's at Kennedy, not at Johnson. We did, for a period of time, had folks from JSC engaged, but they decoupled just because they were so busy with doing other things. But again, it's based on the roles defined to the center. And then the second question was, what do we do at I guess it boils down to what do we do at the end of the challenge? Is there any incentives for the people going on? And so we can't do that, but what I can tell you is what we're doing for the final big event is we're going to have representatives from hopefully all of the major commercial platforms there. And so our work is to really help the challenge teams develop their technologies to a point beyond where they might have visualized it terrestrially, but trying to open them up to some of the issues associated with spaceflight and some of the prime drivers for NASA, or for getting anything that would go through a NASA-type process to fly in space, and so that they're attuned and aware and can account for them. So the hope is that at the end of the day, their technologies will resonate with some of these commercial platforms. And then down the road, NASA is going to continue to keep an eye on things. Like personally for me, Solar Foods checks a lot of the boxes in the sense that they're building and developing a commercial technology that will either make it or not make it terrestrially. I would bet that it makes it. And therefore, they're going to have a period of time to develop that technology before we would need to deploy it in space, so that when the time comes for NASA to look for alternative protein production for a spaceflight application, they're going to be a proven commodity. They're going to be a system that has demonstrated itself, is well known, and is part of the culture. So that's the kind of thing that really helps us take something to space while minimizing the risk. When we have to actually front a lot of the development costs to take an idea and make it mature and then bring it to space, there's a lot of risk there. And the agency has enough risk on its plate, so I don't think it needs to add any more than necessary. So I kind of think that answers the questions, hopefully.
Behind you, Stefan, there's a microphone.
I have a question. I have one.
Go ahead.
Well, first of all, congratulations for your speech. That's amazing. My question is about the impact of microgravity and radiation, but in the body, in the digestion of the foods and metabolisms and the human microbiome. Because you talk about the foods, but for me, I'm a nutritionist, it's very interesting that, because I did read about, for example, the calcium in the bones and the impact in the muscles, but I don't know nothing about in the other. And I think it's interesting for me, just to know.
I'll try to answer, but I'm really not an expert in this field. Yeah, I'm here today, so I'll try to tackle this question as good as I can. So far, I think the effects of microgravity environment and radiation environment are not so big on the digestive system. It's more, as you said, the cardiovascular effects of microgravity that lead to bone loss and muscle loss. These are the effects that are more prominent. But as far as I know, there are no such huge impacts on the digestive system that needs to be evaluated or studied as such. But maybe you have more information on that.
I'm even less of an expert on this, but I'm just voicing something that I had a conversation with your colleagues at ILSI. So there are things which are a little bit different. So for instance, the astronauts do require a higher dose of iron, as far as I understand. So the diet should be rich in iron, which is kind of weird, but apparently that's the case. And obviously the oxidative stress levels are higher, as I understand. So maybe antioxidants in terms of the nutrition is probably a good idea. Okay. But when it comes to like the bowel movements, I'm not sure if I understand what's going to happen there. But yeah, I'm sure that your digestive system will not work the same as it does quite on Earth, and probably your diet should be tuned for that as well.
So one other thing I can tell you is that NASA is very interested in relation to the whole microbiome aspects of spaceflight, not only from the gut microbiome, but also to the plants that we would grow that could potentially impact that, to the systems that the plants grow in, to the overall vehicle microbiome. So this is an integrated idea, and it's something that we in the plant world feel that if we have to compensate or adjust to help human performance, we have the ability with the recipes, the cultivars of plants, how we can engineer those plants to hopefully, benefit the crew on these missions. But a lot of it is still going to take collecting the research data once we get beyond low Earth orbit, again, just because we've had so little time there. The gravitational profile and microgravity may, it's a microgravity profile. It will be similar if I go to deep space until I get to the surface of the moon and Mars, but the radiation profile is different. So we can't just do a one-for-one extrapolation of the data we've collected so far in low Earth orbit and apply it to deep space. But I know they're doing it. I know people are looking at that. I just, again, the expertise to really specifically answer your question isn't here right now today.
Stéphane Vidry, ILSI Global. So thank you very much. I think it's just amazing to hear your talks. I would like you to touch a little bit on food safety and maybe more specifically to allergy. We know that some airlines now no longer serve, for example, peanut because of peanut dust, flying around in a very confined environment. So I'm wondering, how do you deal with that? And maybe the first to answer could be Sonja. How do you deal with a crew member that wants its sundae, its ice cream with peanuts on top of it?
So usually on the food packages, the ingredients are marked. So it will also show up on the ingredients list if there is any type of allergen inside of it. But of course, there is the risk that a crew member eats something and it's allergic to it. But as far as I know, but you guys maybe know better than I do, there are some emergency responses the crew members can perform if someone has an allergic reaction. So they are trained on tackling this problem if there is something, an allergic reaction which was not foreseeable, let's say. But maybe, Ralph, you know more about the food system of NASA and how they deal with the allergens. Because we, in my work, we just produce bonus food tailored to an individual. And the way we cope with allergies is that we list the ingredients on the packaging so that the astronauts know what they eat. But maybe you know more.
So for a while, I was the center rep for the Human Research Program. Those would really be the right people to ask. My assumption would be that there would be very sufficient screening in advance to determine what the potential allergies are that crew members might have, and that the food diet would be tailored accordingly. So I think it's a matter of understanding what the potential issues might be and then prevention and isolation of those food products from going to those crew members. I don't know if there's anything beyond that that's being done. It would take someone who's currently working that field in the Human Research Program to really answer it completely.
On the approach that we develop, trying to fulfill the nutritional needs of the astronauts, we developed AI where we actually put all the nutritional requirements that astronauts need for their diet, and then we added in our in the parameters all the allergen, and so you can put whatever you need in terms of potassium, vitamin C, magnesium, and all of that, and then you can add the allergies, like typically that one astronaut will have, and then the AI will come up with a different selection of plants, still to fulfill the nutritional needs. And so that's before you go to space. Of course, if you go to space and you discover you're allergic to something we didn't know before doing the test, then you need an emergency safety procedure. But AI can help designing the diet based on people's allergies, so you will not be stopped to go to space if you're allergic to too many things.
Yeah, like a comment on Solid has been analyzed for allergenic factors, and it doesn't really have any of those. So I think we're safe on the allergy side. Obviously, it's a bioprocess, so and we deploy HASP at our pilot plant, and it's going to be in the factory as well. But the HASP in space is going to look different than it does on Earth, because, well, on Earth one critical control point is basically plate counting. So, you take samples, you swipe it, you make sure that there's no biological activity. For space, we have thought about this a little bit, and it could be that we do something where we actually extract the protein in batches. They are quarantined until they have been proven to be biologically inactive with no plate counts, for instance, if we do plainly. But there could be some online methods that we could also verify this, that it's inactive. And then, then there's the maintainability and cleanability and all these sort of things. So everything needs to be designed such that, once or twice a year, you just empty everything and steam, sterilize the whole thing inside out. And yeah, that we probably cannot avoid, that it has to be cleaned every now and then.
Actually, thank you very much, everyone, for really wonderful presentations. I wonder, with all these challenges that we are discussing, are you really, truly believing we are going to go to Mars in 2030? And all the projects that, it would be wonderful. I'm looking forward to see that, but it looks so difficult.
Matt, you want to take that one?
I'm retired.
Okay, you're off. You're tired. Yeah. No, happy to stay on the positive side. I think Mars is a challenge. Certainly, the good thing is we're learning every day on the International Space Station and in Earth orbit, so we can knock off some of these problems one by one. And the lunar surface will be that ultimate test bed before we are going to send astronauts on those long missions that Ralph made reference to. When it takes essentially 6 to 9 months for astronauts to arrive at Mars, and they're going to stay for 500 days and then have that same duration to come back to Earth. It would be nice to buy down some risk on the lunar surface. So we'll be going piece by piece and adjusting schedule as it goes. But I think the good thing is we can all remain hopeful that it will happen, and it will happen in the near future. And all these benefits will be coming back to Earth as well. Thanks.
Matt, you may want to move to the U.S. and get a job with NASA. So let me just throw out something, because when I was in college, I remember asking this professor who came to visit. I just had one question for him. I said, "Well, I get to see man land on Mars before the end, before I die," and he was like, "Oh, sure, no problem." And then it's 50 years before we're back to the moon, and counting, 55 plus whatever. So the thing that I would say is that we're going. There's not a question about that, but there's a lot of factors that if we threw a date out there today, it's just a target. It's going to change. We have to prove the technologies, like Matt says, that we're going to be taking with us to the moon. We've got economic issues, the funding. When you look, I think they recently did a poll of U.S. population, and a large number of people were asked to comment on space priorities for the agency, and sending someone to Mars, the public viewed as a low priority. So we have to overcome that. There's a lot of competing, things to do with this money. So some of it's out of our hands. I think we could get there. I think it's also hard to evaluate a time, because I look at things from the history of what we've done in space with Apollo, Space Shuttle, and Space Station. When you have SpaceX coming along, they're radically different. Barbara looks at things far more optimistically in a timeline than I do. And my hope is that the reality is closer to where Barbara would envision it than I would. But there's a lot of issues that need to be addressed. We can't use Apollo as a measuring stick for going back to the moon or Mars, because it's a whole different paradigm what we're doing this time. We're going with more people, we're going there to stay. We're not just going to plant the flag and get out before we run out of life support. So all those technologies have to be radically developed and redevised, and we've got a good, I think, approach in place now to do that. But it's going to take time. So any date we put out there, I think the last one that I was told as an agency we were advertising was somewhere around 2039. But that was back when we were looking at returning to the moon in 2024, 2025. So that slips out. So it's very hard to predict. I would say do your best in the research you do here to extend your own life and aging so you can hopefully be there for when it happens.
So I have a question for, maybe for the panel here in total. We talked about bonus food and the importance of having dishes, items that the astronauts could relate to for special occasions, because food culturally is such an important part of what people do. But the technologies we hear being developed are very narrow in terms of the kinds and variety of food that the astronauts will be able to eat. How do you bridge that gap, and how do you envision taking the technology for a protein or for a limited number of plant varieties and creating the kind of menu that you have today in a sustainable fashion, 500 different food items that people could eat?
Well, 500 will be very challenging, but I really like Solar Foods, Solein, because it gives you such a huge variety of products you can do. And I think part of the game is also preparing food, because some people really like to do cooking or gardening your plants. So I think that is part of the game to keep our astronauts busy on the way to Mars and mentally healthy and preparing also food. I think this is also very important aspects, and I would always say, you guys from Solar Foods, you really need to investigate how a crew member can actually create and prepare a meal out of Solein in microgravity, because cooking is currently not existent in space. Yeah? You rehydrate your food or you warm up your thermostabilized food, but that's all you do basically. And we have to close this gap from harvesting Solein, for example, to really a meal on the plate. So I'm really curious how you going to do that.
So the way there are different ways we've been approaching this, but again, back to first AI. And so having a database of plants and what they're producing in terms of the nutritional value they're bringing, and then understanding what you need to bring to the astronaut. But in our algorithm, so we had all the specification that Ralph mentioned, including palatability, but also diversity. And so the way we train the AI to come up with a crop selection for like, I think we did like for a cycle of like 2 years, 3 years, but you can keep on going and the algorithm will come up with a selection. And it's also to be able to have diversity in the menu in what they're eating. It's going to sound very simple. It's more complicated than it sounds. But so you have this database of plants, you have the nutritional value, you have the information about the plant growth life cycle, what are their requirements, and then you can come up with plants you want to grow, and for every week, basically having a different diet, so you can keep the diversity in the menu. I think it's the future of food is going to be a combination of like prepackaged food and fresh food and your solution, because it's the best protein solution on the market.
It doesn't have a brain.
But the fresh part, I think will bring the touch that will keep astronauts on eating, because one big problem is, even though you have diverse menu, the prepackaged food loses taste and they stop eating. So it's not only that the nutrient degrade, but they don't like eating. So adding fresh ingredients and microgreens and stuff that have taste could help.
Yes.
So a couple of things. It's taste, it's texture, it's the aromas as well. Maybe I didn't get to this in my talk, but when I look at space station now, the bulk of the diet comes from the prepackaged food, but they also get fresh fruit and vegetables at resupply. And if you think of that like a Navy cruise on submarines, it's the same kind of thing. You have to consume them when they arrive because of the spoilage that takes place, but they're always looked on. And the third part of that diet is crew preference items. So different astronauts can select different things that they want that are psychosocial impacts to them that they could benefit from. When you go to Mars, you're going to lose that fresh food and you're going to lose the crew preference items most likely, especially if the food has to be deployed on the surface of Mars. So you can expect a period of time where we're going to be relying on the prepackaged food and whatever plant systems that we can grow to provide some of that option. The other thing is, because of the resources and the mass constraints, we're not going to have the ability to do processing and preparation to the extent that we would like to. So I think that's only going to come into play when you get surface systems where you can deploy that extra infrastructure. So it's at that point where the meals will evolve into be actually something that crew members prepare. And hopefully you'd have a population there where you have someone who's dedicated to preparing those meals. Again, going back to polar exploration, like I said, the most loved and most hated guy on an Arctic expedition ship was the chef. Because he was probably loved at first, but when they started running out of things, they started hating him. So, I could hope for a day when that becomes something that gets played out again, because it shows that we're actually there to stay. So to me, that's the big thing, is you're going to see the food system evolve as the mission scenarios evolve and our architecture expands over time. It's not going to be a stagnant thing. It's going to be something that continues to develop and get better as the time goes on.
Yeah, maybe that's also something that we have been thinking about a lot. So maybe, after Deep Space Food Challenge is over and we kind of have the winners, and, there's going to be some more development of technologies and plants, but we may have a sort of a rough idea what could it be. So at that point, and those will be the raw materials. So then the next question is, how's my galley going to look like on board a habitat? So what do I need for it? People have been talking about 3D printing food, which is maybe one option. Maybe you need some heat extrusion machinery. You need some sort of stock of spices and flavors, so sugar, salt, maybe dried fruit, whatever. So there's going to be an array of things which you can easily ship there, and they will last for a long time, which you will then use to augment the raw materials. The salad that she's going to make, and you want to, okay, you want to do salads.
Saffron, vanilla, but I don't leafy greens.
Okay. Well, the leafy greens, I need to go somewhere else, because we need to then make the sauce for it, right? So the mayo comes from our base, basically. So it's going to be an interesting combination of both machinery, crops. I'd love to have fruit. Are you doing fruits?
Yeah,
okay, there we go. Okay. Yeah, right.
So, one other thing, interestingly, in the food challenge, we actually have 3 different taste testing cycles that are going on. One is off the record at the end, but the first one is just to take the food output of the system in as raw a format as possible and have people try it and see what is it like. The thought process is I could have something that's very bland, has no flavor. That could be a positive thing. Or I could have something that has a flavor, then its rawest form is something I'm going to have to cover up with other ingredients. So that could potentially be a negative. Then the second testing is going to be, okay, now prepare it in a spaceflight scenario where we do have, as R2 alluded to, a minimal galley. And I could use that material that I produced with items from the galley, and what can I do with that? And then that might be I would say, the near-term space solution. And then the final is not something that's evaluated, but at the big award ceremony and the big event, they're going to be able to take their product and use whatever recipes they want and make something that people can try. And that would be the surface advanced system, where now I've got the ability to do processing and preparation. So realistically, the teams are going to see that whole scenario play out as part of the challenge.
Question over here.
Yep. Thank you for a fantastic presentation. And the question to Atul, you are using carbon dioxide and hydrogen to use the microbial to produce the protein. And for me, you never talking about the oxygen recycling. And is that because of our understanding is that an aerobic system actually is not very effective. So it seems like you have a system using not depending on the oxygen. So is that system working well, and can the metabolite produced is well known for those microbial?
Yeah, let me get, I think I got your question. So, yes, so there is actually, it is not fully anaerobic. So there is an oxygen presence also in the bioreactor. So if you wonder where does the water come from, yes, there is oxygen. So well, that, you know, that consumption is not very large, but there's some. And I believe that there's a oxygen free oxygen also in the process. So the hydrogen and the oxygen do react in the biovessel. That's actually where the heat comes from. We produce some heat. Sometimes the NASA and ESA safety people are, they, you know, I see a few raised eyebrows when I say that, you know, there's oxygen and hydrogen. Typically, it's a gas mixture that you kind of don't want to have on a spaceship. Boom. But I mean, it's a safety issue that can be handled. So it's a question of containment. And actually, bioreactors, you know, there are really no ignition sources for it. But yeah, I don't know if that answered your question at all. Okay.
So staying with food safety, I understand you're running scenarios, case scenario. So what are the worst case scenario you're looking into when it comes to food safety? Maybe that's the first question. And the second one would be, because ILSI is very strong in terms of nutrition and food safety, what kind of engagement could you foresee with our organization? Again, we have 10 entities around the world. We have an amazing network of scientists dealing with, you know, from nutrition, food safety, but very cross-disciplinary. So what kind of engagement would you foresee?
So I'll tell you again that the whole idea of plant research generated out of our group at the Kennedy Space Center. And at the time, we didn't have, and still don't really have, the food safety expertise involved. And so we have to basically go to the folks at the Johnson Space Center who are responsible for the crew health and performance to run things through them from a food safety perspective. And so that's kind of like at the end of the chain where you would like it to be earlier than that. So as we start transitioning from research, and maybe we're not really transitioning, but we're including food production, you would like to incorporate that expertise at the ground level. We've gone to folks in the USDA for that insight. We've gone to some of the commercial urban farm, vertical farm companies to do that, but we haven't really done it at a high enough level where we're incorporating food safety as a input to our process beyond HACCP. So I think it would be really good to start collaborations with the folks at Kennedy, because we're doing the early food production because it's plant-based, and really get some expertise resident in-house, or at least what we could tap into regularly. So as we start developing processes and ideas, that we've taken that into account. We depend on very few people for insight in that regard. So being able to elevate that organizationally, I think, to what your organization can bring forward, I think would be a very positive thing.
Good.
Okay. Yeah, and for me, it's a, you know, wonderful thing to meet ILSI and this organization. For us, obviously, as a company, also trying to enter the market here on Earth, having this kind of a tripartite setup where you have government agency, also industry and academic contacts is also quite valuable. And, you know, I mean, getting these new novel proteins to the market, it's not quite that easy, actually. I mean, it's a new thing. There's a scalability challenge, there's a regulatory challenge, and also huge maybe opportunities also in further research down the road. So.
A bit similar regarding the research, more specifically on Earth. Right now, so as a company, we have to generate revenue and to be independent from our investors before we can finance our own system to go to Mars, because we don't want to ask too much money from NASA. That's to answer the other question. I know you don't work for them anymore. No, but we'd love to collaborate more to understand how, as a company, we can join. What we are interested in is getting maybe more about the research program, because Biopod is a wonderful tool to study the impact of the climate and the environment on plants, so to conduct a lot of studies around that. Use our tool for biodiversity conservation as well. So we have reforestation program in South America, which we are looking to deploy, to use the Biopod as a nursery, to grow endangered species, to replant them. So a lot of things like that. We are a small team, but we are expanding in the US on the business side, so super happy to understand how we can help and how you can help, how we can collaborate.
I have a question as a soil scientist. Is there an interest or is it an option to mine minerals from the bedrock on Mars or the Moon?
So, one of the things we're looking at, I would say, the first usage of regolith on the lunar surface, and we'll probably extrapolate to Mars, is how do you use that in construction materials to support your lunar or Martian infrastructure? When I talk about trying to source minerals from some of that material to be incorporated as part of a food production capability, so to speak, that becomes a further on issue. Again, I think, as I may have mentioned in my talk, everybody is trying to figure out how to keep their regolith out, but a lot of the research folks within the NASA research arm are trying to figure out how to grow plants in it, and to me it doesn't align well. On the applied side, they're not looking at doing that. I know that I've seen some information that ILSI, I believe, or it was some organization in Europe, was looking at actually doing something very similar. Instead of using regolith to grow plants directly, how can I extrapolate some of the key minerals or nutrients that might be in material, whether it's lunar or Mars, and enter that into an input source? And so I think there's merits to doing that, but that's an advancement in technology that's down the road. That's not going to be an early thing. However, if you could figure out a good use for the regolith and have the harvesting hardware that I know folks at the Kennedy Space Center have been working on to acquire that regolith and process it, and somewhere in that processing aspect you could extricate material that might still have some of those minerals that then you could do follow-on operations with, I think that would set a pathway that would become potentially a viable way of acquiring some of those nutrients and minerals.
All right, I'm going to wrap this up then with a fun question to end this session. And I appreciate all the serious questions you've all answered. So I am a Star Trek fan, and I know that when I was watching Star Trek when I was much younger, one of the things I thought was really cool was you walk up to a door and it just opens, right? And then you had the communicators, and you just talk to people without actually needing a phone line. And now we have doors that open in every hotel or every place you go without needing to pull a handle, and you have cell phones that are effectively communicators. So which of those technologies, science fiction technologies, do you see being applied next? And I'm thinking about food replicators, but I'll take whichever one you think is going to happen next.
I think it's the cool uniforms.
You don't have to answer this question if you don't want to.
Yeah, the food replicator is actually a good idea. That would be that you press the button and you get the, Yeah, you get your dish out. That'd be great. That'd be great in the galley. I would like to see that.
Do you know how much pressure that food replicator has put on people to actually come up with? If I never would have seen that, that idea wouldn't be in all these people's minds, and we wouldn't have to, have that as a goal we have to aspire to.
All right, Matt, what's your answer to that question?
Well, Todd, it sounds like there's international consensus on the food replicator, so I think we get that documented and we all start working on it.
Well, I want to once again thank this wonderful panel for an extraordinary session this afternoon. This was incredibly enlightening, very challenging intellectually, and really paints a wonderful picture for the future and should be inspiring for all of us in terms of the work that's going on and the hard work going on to both improve the food system and get us to continue exploration. So thank you very much, all of you, and thank you for hanging in there with us today.